Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Latinx and Kid Lit YouTube channel. I'm Dr. Sonia Alejandra Rodriguez, and I'm here with Dora Guzman, and we're going to talk about some of the Chato books because we are celebrating the 25th year anniversary of the Pura Belpre award. And so again, I'm Sonia Rodriguez, here, happy to be here. I'm a contributor to the blog. I'm also a professor. Dora, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Hi, Sonia. Yeah, so my name is Dora Guzman. I'm a bilingual reading specialist for grades K-5 as well as an adjunct for some literacy courses. And I can't wait to talk about these two books. I checked them out in English and Spanish. Yeah, and like Sonia mentioned, we're doing a series on talking about award-winning books for the anniversary.
Awesome. So just a little bit about the Pura Belpre Award. It's is it hosted? It's given annually by the Association for Library Service for Children. The Pura Belpre Award started in 1996, and so now it's in its 25th year. And so maybe we could talk about like the first book in 1996, which is The Kitchen, right? The Chato in the Kitchen one.
Yes.
Yeah, which got the award for illustration. And so Chato's Kitchen is written by Gary Soto, and the illustrations are done by Susan Guevara. Any thoughts on this book?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned before, I love both the English and the Spanish version. But I remember first reading the books and I kind of had to warm up myself to like liking it, right? I don't know why. I don't know when I first picked it up, I think it was like early 2000s. And I picked it up and I was like, it was just so different, but the storyline is hilarious. So I think that's what kind of took me in, right? And then looking at the illustrations, which I know you're going to talk about. But I just love the laid backness of it. The Chato is probably I don't think he's like my favorite character. I think his friend is. Who's his friend? Novio Boy?
Oh, yeah. I think that's also just what I like really like. So the story takes place in East LA. I'm not from California. I'm not from Los Angeles. I think the closest connection I have is like just Chicanx like culture because I'm Mexican. But it does feel very like LA, Chicano, like aesthetic culture and the nicknames. So yeah, when I read these very similarly, I was like, what is this? I like it.
Yes, I felt the same way where I was like, okay, hold on. I was like, it's just, and it again, it just brought me in when I read it in both English and Spanish. And even like the English version has like Spanish words like really weaved in, just so authentically, where I was like, okay, I'm gonna love this at the end, and I did, right? And so, especially like the audio versions.
Oh yeah, can you show us the audio version?
Yes, so
I
there's
didn't know there was an audio.
there's a read along, and it's also on Epic. So Cheech Marin reads. Which one did he read? He read, I think, Chato's Kitchen, right? Yes, he read this one. And then Luis Guzman read Chato and the Party Animals. And the whole time there's like music in the background, right? So you're totally in
immersed.
And their voices, right? They're very well known Latinx actors. So it brings it all together, especially with that audio.
Yeah, and they have that aesthetic, right? Like even within like the narrative or the narration that Gary Soto provides, right? It's very like it's like orale is like in orale neighbors, Chato purred, right? They walk in slow and low, right? So it's clearly like a West Coast aesthetic that I was familiar with, and I was like, all right.
Yes, or they'll say like muy nice, like, oh, that was muy nice. And I was like, oh yeah, like you hear that again. I'm not from California, but you hear that even here in Chicago, right? And how I remember how like my cousins used to talk, and how like some of my friends like talked as well. Like, right, we use English and Spanish all the time, and like when they said like muy nice, and the way that Luis Guzman says it, it's like, oh yeah, it's a very familiar, it's very, very familiar vocab.
Yeah, definitely. I'm from Chicago too, FYI. I didn't know that. Here we are, folks, learning something new about one another.
Well, does it count? I'm not really from Chicago. I'm like from the suburbs.
Okay, what's
Like,
sidetrack? What suburb are you from?
I grew up in like around the Berwyn area, so like Lyons Berwyn.
Shut up! I'm from Cicero.
No, you're not.
I sure am, folks. I just found my cousin doing this video. Okay, all right, but
I'll have to tell you what high school I went to. I don't want to put that much information out there.
But all right, let's get back to the book. See, this is what happens when the book community comes together. You find out like your cousin's contributing to the same blog you are.
See?
All right. So one of the things that I really am fascinated by Chato's stories, both in the kitchen and the party animals, is the way that Gary Soto and Susan Guevara approach, I think, this topic of differences and embracing differences, right? Because I think in the kitchen in particular, Chato and his friends want to make a big dinner, and it turns out that the mice are going to be the dinner, right? Cat, mice, right? But it turns out that they have a lot more in common. And so, spoiler alert from a 1995 book, if you haven't read it, is that they end up having a dinner together, right? And so I think I really appreciate that, and thinking about how do we talk about differences, right, with children or even as adults, right? How do we approach our own differences, and how do we have those difficult conversations? Do you teach this book in your classroom? Do you talk to students about this book?
Yeah, so with my students, they're bilingual readers, so they read in both Spanish and English, and we read it aloud. Again, because it's foreign from 1995, I feel like it kind of, again, as time goes on, right, more books get published, it kind of gets lost, but I love having it in my like library where they can check it out, but our teachers also read it out loud in both languages. And I feel like my kids who are from like second grade and up, like they get some of that playfulness, right, of Chato and the sneakiness of his character, right, that he's inviting mice over, and they like catch on right away, like, oh my goodness, right? He wants to trap them, or like, oh, it's a trap. But my younger ones, they'll get into a lot of, when we read it aloud, more of like, again, the vocabulary they use, the mixing of English and Spanish that they use just naturally, they'll hone in on that. With the illustrations, I know you wrote a lot, you wrote a review on the illustration itself, but I feel like, again, the illustrations are very, I don't even know the right word for it. I feel like you can really see the art in the illustrations, how like the actual process, right? Like you can see the strokes, the brush strokes, you can see like just like the mixing of the colors, which is, again, the kids are like, wow, let me look closer at that. So I think they're gravitated towards that. They gravitate towards that style because, again, they haven't seen anything else like it.
Yeah, I can't remember what style Susan Guevara used, but you're right. If you look closer at the images, right, you can definitely see the brush strokes. You can see, or what might be brush strokes or made to look like brush strokes, right? And there's just so much detail. But what I like is just sort of like the little faces. Like they're so emotive throughout, like all of the pages, right? Even in the party animals, right? I mean, just look at the cover, like. That cat's is up to no good, right? Like that, right. We're in trouble, right? Like, but all of the characters are so emotive, right? As you flip through the pages, which I think is something that resonates with children, right? Even if you're just not at the reading level yet, just by looking at the illustrations, right, that Guevara has presented here, like you could see the story, you could see the community, you could see, you can maybe like feel, right, what is happening, which I think is what I appreciate about Guevara's aesthetic.
When I looked at that page that you were just on, Sorry, that was my school bell.
That's okay. This one,
Sorry.
the
Yes,
community
that
one?
reminded me of, have you read Raul III's Vamos?
Yes.
It
Yes.
reminded me of kind of, again, like that very community feel, like, and a lot of things that you could literally stay on a page for a long time and really talk about it, right? And delve deeper into just the different characters and the action going on, which again, I think is super important for our readers who are still developing their independent reading skills.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't help to think of like other books that are other like Latinx kids books that are similar to this or that might reflect or even like allude to. So like the Vamos series like is very like similar, right, to this idea of like we're going to show community, and not only like we're going to show you the whole community, right? There's a map. It's very like when I looked at that because I did the review for the Vamos book for one of the Vamos books. Every little part, right? Every little food truck had like a name to it, and very similar, right, to this aesthetic of like we're just going to like flood our readers with as much information about our community or our imagined community as possible. It also reminded me of Isabel Quintero's work. I forget the name of the picture book.
With, mi mami tiene, no, mi papá tiene una motocicleta.
Motocicleta, yeah, because they go on a tour of the neighborhood as well, right? And so in that book, it also has like a spread of the neighborhood, right? And then I was also thinking of Quintero's Ugly Cat books. They're chapter books.
Yes, is
they're
it a
chapter.
series too?
Yes, I think those are only two of them. But I mean, the Ugly Cat, right? Also, again, reminded me of this like 1995 book, and I was like, oh man, I like seeing that connection, right? Because I think you're right that like there's so much and so much great like Latinx books coming out that we tend to forget and ignore, right? Some of the earlier ones that I think are still so great for what they were, for what they did, right? To the literature, for the literature, um, and then these are still some of my favorite books.
Well, and even just how they're written, and I know we're cutting it. I don't know. I did not set my camera, but just the type of vocabulary and like the language in terms of like descriptive. And you're an English professor, so you probably will say this my own. But like when I think about the vocabulary that I expose my own students to, right, and that I want them to learn and use in their own writing, I feel like these are great texts to use, because nowadays you really have to analyze a lot of the books, right, to make sure that they're using authentic language, right, that
Yeah.
we're not using Spanish just for the sake of using Spanish. But Gary Soto, he's one that he definitely added a lot of vocabulary words and just even just metaphors, and I'm like, wow, I can really pull that and show it to my writers so that they can include it in their own writing, right?
Yeah, and I'm just flipping through the books as like you're talking, right? Looking at the language, and I'm still coming across like some of these like very specific like Chicanx words like pachanga and carnal. I was like,
Yes.
oh. And it sounds like my dad is talking.
Yes, they were listening to La Bamba while they were cooking.
Yeah, I mean, this is like clearly like a very specific aesthetic, a specific time. But I I appreciate it. Yeah, and I think you're right though that the writing, I think the writing still like stands like the test of time. Like I think it's still a very strong book. Um, I teach a children's literature course at the institution where I'm at, and I share this book with students. I think particularly because going back to what we had addressed at the beginning, right? It still, I think, does a very good job at addressing like differences, right? It sets up, like in the kitchen one, or even in the party animals, right? It sets up like what we think of like as dichotomy, like relationships, dogs versus cats, cats versus mice, right? And they somehow have to find a way to come together. And the way that Soto and Guevara do that is by putting these characters in a situation where they need one another, right? We need something from the mice, we need something from the dogs, and so we need to come together in order to survive or to create a better outcome. which I think is something that is still very relevant to us today, right? That we need to somehow get our stuff together and come together.
It's like they all live in the same community, right? And they all have, again, different perspectives as well. Like the cat has his own perspective, right? Chato has his own perspective. And then, you know, so do like los ratones and their families. But again, they come together, and I like how they come around. Again, you know that a lot of our get-togethers always involve food, and I love that they highlight that, right? How everybody is making their own, right? Traen su propio platillo, right? They're all bringing their different dishes and they're coming together, which is very much, it's very much a tradition in a lot of our families.
Yeah, I agree. So again, the Chato in the Kitchen got the Medal for Illustration in 1996, and the Chato and the Party Animals, or I also like that word, pachangueros, got the Medal for Illustration again in 2002. Dora, thank you so much for joining me and having this very brief conversation about books that we love. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Stay tuned for more videos coming in the future as we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Pura Belpre Award. Bye.